Felicia's hands were still shaking when she stepped off the elevator on the 34th floor of the residences at Billionaires Row in Manhattan. The moving box in her arms felt heavier than it should have, but she knew that was just her nerves. Everything felt heavier these days. Her thoughts, her memories, the constant looking over her shoulder that had become as natural as breathing. 3 days ago, she had caught her ex-boyfriend Darnell going through her laptop. She had come home early from a client meeting, expecting to find an empty apartment. Instead, she found him sitting at her desk, scrolling through her emails with a kind of casual ease that made her stomach turn. He was tracking her location through an app he had secretly installed. He was reading her private messages. He was screenshotting her bank statements and sending them to his own phone. When she confronted him, demanding to know what he was doing, he had not even flinched. He had simply looked up at her with that slow, dangerous smile she had learned to fear and said, "You think you can leave me, baby? I will always find you. No matter where you go, no matter what you do, you belong to me." That was the moment Felicia knew she had to run. She had been planning her escape for 6 months before that night. Secret savings account that Darnell did not know about, research on apartments with good security systems, a burner phone hidden in her gym bag for emergencies. She had read every article about leaving abusive relationships. She had memorized the steps. She had prepared for this moment. But preparing for something and actually doing it were two very different things. Now she was here, the most expensive building she had ever set foot in, let alone lived in. Her entire savings wiped out for the security deposit and first month's rent. No forwarding address left behind. New phone number. All her social media accounts deleted. She had even paid cash for her taxi from the storage unit where she had hidden her suitcases. This was supposed to be her fresh start, her escape, her hiding place from the man who had spent 3 years slowly taking control of every aspect of her life. The hallway stretched before her, sleek and modern with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in streams of natural light. The pale walls and minimalist design screamed money in a way that made Felicia feel like an imposter. Her cream-colored knit sweater and worn jeans felt out of place here. Her large gold hoop earrings suddenly seemed too loud for this quiet, expensive space. She adjusted her grip on the moving box and started walking toward apartment 34B, her new home. Then she froze. A man stood outside the door next to hers. Apartment 34A, he was East Asian, late 20s or maybe early 30s, with black hair slicked back with the kind of precision that suggested expensive products and even more expensive taste. He wore a gray fitted shirt with a black collar that probably cost more than her monthly rent. A luxury watch glinted on his wrist, catching the light from the windows. Everything about him radiated wealth and power. But it was not his clothes or his watch that made Felicia stop in her tracks. It was the way he held himself, perfectly still, perfectly composed, with an air of authority and calculated calm that reminded her of a predator at rest. He had the kind of stillness that powerful men have, the kind that said he had never run from anything in his life, the kind that said he was used to being in control of every situation he walked into. His dark eyes locked onto hers, and Felicia felt something shift in her chest. She could not look away. He studied her with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable. His gaze moved from her face to the box in her arms to the keys clutched in her trembling fingers. He took in every detail with a kind of observation that suggested he was cataloging information for later use. "New neighbor," he said finally. His voice was low and controlled, with the faintest accent she could not quite place. It was not a question. Felicia swallowed hard. "Just moving in." He tilted his head slightly, like she was a puzzle he intended to solve. His expression gave nothing away. No warmth, no hostility, just that intense, observant gaze that seemed to see right through her. "Welcome to the building, then." He did not smile. He did not look away. He simply watched her stand there, frozen in the hallway like a deer caught in headlights. Felicia hated how vulnerable she felt under his stare. She hated how her heart was racing and her palms were sweating against the cardboard box. She hated how breathless and nervous she sounded when she finally managed to mumble a thank you. She fumbled with her keys for what felt like an eternity. Her hands were shaking so badly that she dropped them twice. Each time, she felt his eyes on her back, watching her struggle with the lock. When she finally got the door open, she practically threw herself inside and slammed it shut behind her. Felicia pressed her back against the door and tried to catch her breath. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. What was that? She did not know who that man was. She did not know anything about him except that he lived next door and looked at her like he could see every secret she was trying to hide. And something about him made her pulse skip in a way she could not explain. Not fear exactly. Something deeper. Something she could not name. She had come here to disappear. But the man next door looked at her like she was already found. Before we continue with this story, I need you to do something for me. I pour my heart into these stories, and it genuinely hurts when people watch without subscribing. Please, just take 1 second and subscribe. It's free, and it means the world to me. Also, drop a comment telling me your favorite part of the story and tell me where you're watching from as well. Now, let's continue. What Felicia did not know, what she could not possibly have known, was that the man standing in the hallway was far more dangerous than any ex-boyfriend she was running from. His name was Kang Min. In the daylight hours, he was the CEO of Horizon Pacific Imports, a legitimate import-export company worth over $2 billion. He appeared in Forbes articles and business magazines. He attended charity events and high-profile conferences. He was the kind of success story that people admired from a distance. But when the sun went down, Kang Min was something else entirely. He controlled one of the most powerful Korean crime syndicates operating on American soil. His territory stretched from Manhattan to Los Angeles. His network ran deeper than the FBI could trace. He had connections in every major port, every financial institution, every corner of the underworld where power and money exchanged hands. He was not a man who paid attention to neighbors. He was not a man who noticed the people around him unless they were useful or threatening. His life was too complicated, too dangerous for casual acquaintances and small talk in hallways. But something about the woman he had just encountered made him pause. Kang Min stepped into his own apartment, but he did not close the door immediately. Instead, he stood in the doorway, thinking about what he had observed. The way she clutched that moving box like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. The way she looked over her shoulder before entering her apartment, as if expecting someone to be following her. The fear in her eyes that she was trying so hard to hide. And most importantly, the bruise on her wrist that her sweater sleeve almost covered. Almost. Someone was hunting her. Kang Min closed his door and pulled out his phone. He dialed his second-in-command, a man named Jun Ho who had been with him since they were teenagers in Seoul. "I need you to run a background check," he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to being obeyed without question. "The new tenant in 34B, I want everything. Family, employment, relationships, legal history, social media presence, everything. And I want it tonight." Jun Ho did not ask why. He never did. Consider it done. Kang Min ended the call and walked to his window. His penthouse offered a stunning view of Central Park and the Manhattan skyline beyond. He had stood at this window 1,000 times, thinking about deals and enemies and the endless chess game of running an empire. Tonight, he was thinking about a woman with fear in her eyes and a bruise on her wrist. He did not know why he was curious. He did not know why he cared. But he had a policy about predators who thought they could operate in his territory. He dealt with them personally. The next morning, Felicia woke up in her new apartment and took a moment to remember where she was. The ceiling was unfamiliar. The sounds were different. For 3 years, she had woken up next to Darnell, always aware of his breathing, always careful not to disturb him before he was ready to wake. Old habits died hard. But Darnell was not here. She was alone. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, that felt like a blessing rather than a curse. She spent the morning unpacking her life into the 2-bedroom apartment that had cost her everything she had. It was not much. 2 suitcases of clothes, a box of books and keepsakes, her laptop and the freelance graphic design business she had built from nothing. The essentials of a life stripped down to what she could carry when running for her survival. Felicia was 26 years old. She had grown up in foster care in Newark, New Jersey, bouncing from home to home until she aged out of the system at 18. No family to call when things got hard. No safety net to catch her when she fell. Everything she had built herself. Her graphic design skills, her client list, her reputation as someone who delivered quality work on time. And then Darnell had come along and slowly, methodically, taken it all apart. It started with small things, as it always does. Checking her phone when she was in the shower, asking where she was every hour, getting upset when she spent time with friends instead of him. She told herself it was because he loved her. She told herself it was just protectiveness. She told herself that she was lucky to have someone who cared so much. By the time she realized it was not love but control, she was already trapped. He had isolated her from everyone who cared about her. He monitored her emails and her texts. He showed up at her client meetings unannounced to surprise her. He controlled the finances and made her account for every dollar she spent. And when she tried to push back, he reminded her that she was alone in the world. No family, no real friends anymore, just him. What would she do without him? Where would she go? The night she caught him installing tracking software on her laptop was the night she finally saw the truth clearly. He did not love her. He owned her, and he would never let her go willingly. So she had stopped asking for permission and started planning her escape. Now she was here, alone, free, terrified. But free was more important than terrified. She had to keep reminding herself of that. Meanwhile, in the penthouse apartment next door, Kang-min sat in his home office, reviewing the background check that Jun-ho had delivered an hour ago. Felicia Monroe, age 26, freelance graphic designer, no criminal record, no family to speak of, grew up in the foster care system in New Jersey, built a successful small business through talent and determination. The kind of American dream story that made for good press. But it was the relationship section of the report that held Kang-min's attention. Ex-boyfriend, Darnell Pierce, age 31, self-employed business consultant with a history that did not hold up under scrutiny. 2 previous restraining order violations from ex-girlfriends. Rumored connections to a small-time extortion ring operating out of Jersey City. The kind of man who knew how to skirt the law without quite breaking it enough to face serious consequences. The kind of man who made women disappear into themselves until there was nothing left. Kang-min closed the file and sat back in his chair. This woman had escaped a predator. She had done what so many could not. She had found the strength to run when running seemed impossible, and she had chosen this building, this floor, the apartment right next to his. In Kang-min's world, there were no coincidences, but he did not believe in fate either. He believed in action. He believed in power. He believed that the strong had a responsibility to protect those who could not protect themselves. His sister had taught him that lesson. In her death, she had taught him the cost of failing to act. He would not fail again. That evening, Felicia was attempting to cook dinner in her new kitchen when everything went wrong. She had been so distracted by her thoughts that she forgot about the pasta sauce simmering on the stove. By the time she noticed the burning smell, smoke was already billowing up toward the ceiling. The smoke detector started screaming, filling the apartment with a piercing alarm that made her ears ring. Felicia panicked. She grabbed a dish towel and started waving it frantically at the detector, trying to clear the smoke. But it only seemed to make things worse. The alarm kept blaring. The smoke kept spreading, and she could not find the button to turn off the stove because everything in this fancy apartment was different from what she was used to. A knock came at her door. Felicia froze, her heart hammered in her chest. Who would be knocking? Did someone call the fire department? Was the building going to evacuate? She was going to get kicked out on her first day, and then she would have nowhere to go and Darnell would find her and... She forced herself to breathe. She walked to the door. She opened it. Kang-min stood in the hallway, holding a small fire extinguisher with an expression that might have been amusement on anyone else. On him, it was just a slight softening of that intense, unreadable face. "Do you need this?" he asked, gesturing with the extinguisher. Felicia felt her face flush with embarrassment. "It's just pasta sauce. I promise I'm not actually burning down the building." "That remains to be seen." He looked past her at the smoke billowing from the kitchen. "May I?" Before she could answer, he stepped inside her apartment. He moved with the kind of confidence that suggested he was used to walking into spaces uninvited. Before she could protest, he was in her kitchen, calmly locating the control panel for her stove and turning it off. He opened the window with practiced ease, letting the cool Manhattan air flow in. The smoke began to dissipate. Felicia stood frozen in the doorway of her own kitchen, watching this stranger take control of the situation. Part of her knew she should be alarmed. A man she did not know was in her apartment. Every instinct that Darnell had drilled into her over 3 years screamed that this was dangerous, that she should tell him to leave, that she should not trust anyone. But there was something about the way Kangmin moved. Calm, efficient, like he was solving a minor inconvenience rather than invading her space. He did not look at her with the possessive hunger that Darnell always had. He did not make her feel small or stupid for making a mistake. He just fixed the problem, and then turned to face her with that same unreadable expression. "You should invest in a better exhaust fan," he said. "This building has old ventilation on this floor. The construction was supposed to update it, but the project was delayed. I can speak to building management if you would like." Felicia blinked. Thank you, I'll keep that in mind." He walked toward the door, his footsteps silent on the hardwood floor. Then he paused, turning back to look at her. "Kangmin," he said, "since we are neighbors, you should know my name." "Felicia," she replied, then immediately wished she had not. She was supposed to be hiding. She was not supposed to be giving her name to strangers, no matter how helpful they seemed. But Kangmin just nodded like he already knew. "I know." And then he was gone, closing the door quietly behind him, leaving Felicia standing in her smoky kitchen with more questions than answers. She cleaned up the mess from her disastrous dinner attempt and ordered takeout instead. But as she ate her Chinese food alone in her new apartment, she could not stop thinking about her neighbor. He had been in her apartment. He had handled her small emergency like it was nothing. He knew her name without her telling him, and something about the way he moved, the way he watched her, made her feel things she had not felt in years. She should be terrified. So why did she feel, for the first time in months, almost safe? 1 week passed. Felicia started settling into a routine that felt almost normal. She woke up early each morning and made coffee, standing at her window to watch the sun rise over Central Park. She spent her days working on freelance projects, slowly rebuilding the client relationships that Darnell's controlling behavior had damaged. In the evenings, she took long walks through the Upper East Side, relearning what it felt like to move through the world without someone monitoring her every step. She saw Kangmin in the hallway twice during that week. Brief encounters, polite nods, a few words about the weather or the building's amenities, nothing that should have lingered in her mind the way it did. But she found herself thinking about him more than she wanted to admit. The way he held himself with such stillness. The way his dark eyes seemed to see right through her. The way his voice dropped to a lower register when he said her name. She told herself it was just because he was attractive. She told herself it was just because he had been kind to her when she needed help. She told herself it meant nothing. Then Darnell found her. It started with an email to her new work account. The one she had created specifically for her fresh start, using a variation of her middle name and a new domain. There was no way he should have been able to find it. She had been so careful. But there it was in her inbox. A message from an email address she did not recognize, but with a writing style she knew intimately. "Did you really think you could hide from me, baby? I know you're in New York. I know you're on the Upper East Side. It's only a matter of time before I find your exact address. And when I do, we're going to have a long conversation about loyalty. You can run all you want, but you know how this ends. You always come back to me. D." Felicia's blood went cold. She read the email 3 times, hoping she had misunderstood. Hoping it was some kind of mistake, but the words did not change. The threat was clear. He was looking for her. He knew she was in Manhattan, and he was not going to stop until he found her. How she had been so careful. New phone, new accounts, no social media. She had paid cash for everything she could. She had not told a single person from her old life where she was going. But Darnell had always been smart, smarter than she gave him credit for. He had spent 3 years studying her, learning her patterns, anticipating her moves. Of course, he would find a way to track her down. Felicia did not sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, jumping at every sound, convinced that Darnell was going to come bursting through her door at any moment. By morning, she was exhausted and terrified and furious at herself for thinking she could ever really escape. Kang Min noticed the change in her immediately. He was leaving for a business meeting when he saw Felicia emerge from her apartment. Her eyes were shadowed with dark circles. Her hands trembled as she locked her door. She jumped when the elevator dinged, her whole body tensing like she expected an attack. She looked over her shoulder 3 times before stepping into the elevator. She did not see him watching from his doorway. Someone had made contact. Kang Min waited until she was gone, then returned to his apartment. He pulled up the building's security footage from the past 24 hours on his private system, one he had installed himself that the building management knew nothing about. Every camera in the building fed into his network. Every entrance and exit was monitored by his people. Nothing unusual in the footage. No visitors to her door, no suspicious activity in the hallways, but he noticed something else. A car parked across the street for 6 hours yesterday. New Jersey plates. A dark sedan that had no business sitting in that spot for that long. Kang Min ran the plates through his contacts in law enforcement. The car was registered to a company that did not exist, which meant it was registered by someone who knew how to hide their tracks, but not well enough. His people traced the company back to a P.O. box in Jersey City, the same neighborhood where Darnell Pierce had his so-called consulting business. The same car appeared in the background of Darnell's social media photos. Kang Min made a call. "I need everything you can find on Darnell Pierce," he said to Junho. "Where he works, where he sleeps, who he talks to. Every move he makes, I want to know about it, and put a tail on him. If he comes within 10 blocks of this building, I want to know immediately." Junho hesitated. This is about the neighbor, the new woman. This is about someone thinking they can hunt in my territory. Understood. Kang Min ended the call and stood at his window, watching the city below. He thought about his sister again, about the boyfriend who had seemed so charming at first, about the warning signs they had all missed until it was too late. He would not miss them this time. That evening, Felicia found a small package outside her door. She froze when she saw it, her mind immediately jumping to the worst possibilities. A threat from Darnell, something dangerous, something designed to hurt her. But the package was too small and neatly wrapped to be threatening. She picked it up cautiously and brought it inside. No return address, no postage stamps. Someone had left it directly at her door. Inside was a personal safety alarm, small enough to fit on a keychain, sleek and modern in design, and a handwritten note with neat, precise handwriting that she recognized somehow. "For your evening walks." The button triggers a 130 decibel alarm and sends a GPS alert to local authorities. "Stay aware. KM." Felicia stared at the note for a long time. Her mysterious neighbor had given her a safety device. He had noticed that she took evening walks. He was paying attention to her habits, her routines, her movements through the world. She should be creeped out. She should be terrified that yet another man was watching her, tracking her, making himself part of her life without her permission. But somehow this felt different. This did not feel like Darnell's suffocating surveillance. This felt like protection, like someone actually cared whether she was safe. Felicia clipped the alarm to her keychain and felt the knot in her chest loosen just slightly. That night, she finally slept. 2 weeks into her new life, Felicia made a friend. The building concierge was a woman named Rosa who had worked at the residences for over 15 years. She knew everyone and everything that happened in the building, and she loved to talk. Felicia started stopping by the front desk each morning to chat. It was nice to have a friendly face. Nice to have someone who smiled at her and asked how she was settling in. Nice to feel like she was building connections again after Darnell had isolated her from everyone. One morning, their conversation turned to the other residents in the building. "You're lucky, you know," Rosa said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "You got the apartment next to Mr. Kang." Felicia felt her cheeks warm. "Kangmin, my neighbor. That's the one, very private man, very important. You know, they say he runs half of Manhattan's shipping industry. His company is worth billions. Billions? Can you imagine? Rosa shook her head in wonder. He seems nice, Felicia said, thinking about the fire extinguisher and the safety alarm. Rosa lowered her voice. Between you and me, honey, some people say he's connected. Like connected, Korean Mafia connected. She held up her hands. I don't know anything for sure, you understand, just rumors. But he's always been polite to me, so I don't ask questions. In this city, sometimes it's better not to know. Felicia laughed nervously. Mafia, that sounds like a movie. Rosa shrugged. This is New York, honey. Stranger things have happened. You just keep being polite to him, and I'm sure you'll be fine. He's actually very generous to the building staff during the holidays. Tips like you wouldn't believe. That night, Felicia did something she knew she should not do. She sat at her laptop with a glass of wine and Googled Kang Min. The legitimate results were impressive. CEO of Horizon Pacific Imports, one of the largest import-export companies on the East Coast. Forbes 30 under 30 from 7 years ago. Philanthropist who had donated millions to Korean-American cultural organizations. Reclusive billionaire who rarely gave interviews and kept his personal life completely private. But when she dug deeper, into online forums and conspiracy threads and news articles from South Korean publications, a different picture emerged. His father had been a powerful man in Seoul with rumored ties to organized crime. When his father died 12 years ago, the young Kang Min had taken over the family business and expanded operations into America with impressive speed. Some said he had legitimate business savvy. Others said he had inherited more than just money. There were whispers of protection rackets operating along the West Coast shipping routes, rumors of rival businessmen who had crossed Kang Min and mysteriously lost everything, stories of men who had threatened his interests and were never seen again. None of it was proven, none of it was confirmed, but the rumors were consistent enough to paint a picture. Felicia closed her laptop slowly. The man who had given her a safety alarm, the man who had calmly handled her kitchen fire, the man who looked at her like he could see through walls. He was not just a wealthy businessman. He was dangerous. She barely slept that night. The next time Felicia saw Kang Min in the hallway, her entire demeanor had changed. She kept her distance. She avoided eye contact. When he said good morning, she gave a clipped reply and hurried toward the elevator without waiting for him to respond. Her body language screamed that she wanted to be left alone. Kang Min noticed immediately. He did not say anything in the hallway, but when the elevator arrived and they both stepped inside, he pressed the lobby button and then turned to face her. You looked me up, he said calmly. It was not a question. Felicia's heart hammered in her chest. She gripped her purse strap so tightly her knuckles turned white. I don't know what you're talking about. You do, and you found things that scared you. He watched her face carefully. Ask me. Ask you what? Whatever you want to know. The elevator descended in silence. Felicia's mind raced with possibilities. This was insane. She was alone in an elevator with a man who might be a crime boss. She should be screaming for help. She should be pressing the emergency button. She should be running as far and as fast as she could. But she looked at him, really looked, and she saw something she recognized. Behind that controlled exterior, behind the expensive clothes and the intimidating stillness, she saw the same careful walls she had built around herself. The same guarded expression she wore when she did not want anyone to see how afraid she was. The same calculated distance that came from a lifetime of protecting yourself from harm. He was not so different from her. He was just better at hiding it. Are you going to hurt me? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kang Min turned to face her fully. His dark eyes held hers without flinching. I have never hurt someone who did not deserve it, he said quietly. And you, Felicia Monroe, have done nothing to deserve anything but protection. The elevator doors opened to the lobby. Kang Min stepped out, then paused and looked back at her. Your ex-boyfriend hired someone to follow you, he said, as casually as if he were mentioning the weather. A private investigator with a criminal record and no ethics. I dealt with it. The man has been encouraged to find a new line of work in a different state. Felicia felt the blood drain from her face. You're welcome, Kang Min added. And then he walked away, disappearing through the lobby doors and into a black car that was waiting for him at the curb. Felicia stood frozen in the elevator until the doors started to close. She stumbled out into the lobby, her mind reeling. He knew about Darnell. He knew about the stalking, and he had done something about it without even telling her. She should be furious. She should be terrified. She should be running to the police to report that her neighbor was apparently conducting vigilante justice on her behalf. But all she could think was, someone is finally on my side. Felicia did not believe Kang Min's claims until she saw the news report 2 days later. A man named Vincent Crawley had been arrested in Manhattan for stalking and illegal surveillance. According to the report, police had received an anonymous tip that led them to Crawley's apartment, where they found evidence of multiple stalking operations targeting vulnerable women. In his possession were photographs of Felicia entering her building, detailed notes about her schedule, and text messages from someone saved in his phone as DP. Darnell Pierce. He had hired someone to stalk her, and that someone was now in jail. Felicia watched the report 3 times, waiting for the relief to wash over her. But all she felt was the cold realization of how close Darnell had gotten, how much he already knew about her new life, how little time she had before he found her exact address. The charges against Crawley were unlikely to stick long-term. The evidence had been anonymously submitted in ways that made it legally complicated. But for now, at least, the man who had been tracking her was off the streets. And she knew exactly who was responsible. That evening, Felicia stood outside Kang Min's door for 10 minutes before she finally worked up the courage to knock. He answered immediately, like he had been expecting her. He was dressed more casually than she had ever seen him. Black t-shirt that showed off arms more muscular than his business attire had suggested. Gray sweatpants, feet bare on the hardwood floor. He looked almost human like this, almost approachable. You got him arrested, she said. I got him off the streets, Kang Min replied. The arrest was a bonus. Why? Why do you care what happens to me? He studied her for a long moment. His expression gave nothing away, but something in his eyes shifted. Softened, maybe, or opened. Come in, he said, stepping aside. I think we need to have a real conversation. Felicia hesitated. Every instinct she had told her this was a bad idea. You do not walk into a crime boss's apartment, no matter how helpful he has been. You do not trust men who operate outside the law, no matter how handsome they are. But she stepped inside anyway. His apartment was stunning. 3 times the size of hers, at least, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Manhattan. The decor was minimalist and expensive. Clean lines, neutral colors, original artwork on the walls that probably cost more than she would make in a lifetime. But what caught Felicia's attention was a small shelf in the corner of the living room. 3 photographs in simple frames. A woman who looked like an older version of Kang Min, with the same strong features and dark eyes. A man with a stern face and kind eyes. And a young girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, grinning at the camera with uninhibited joy. My mother, Kang Min said, following her gaze. He came to stand beside her close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle. My father and my sister. You have a sister. Had. The word hung in the air between them. Felicia turned to look at him and saw something crack in that carefully controlled exterior. Pain, old and deep and never fully healed. She was killed 12 years ago, Kang Min continued, his voice flat. She was 19, I was 23. She had been dating a man who seemed perfect at first, charming, attentive, everything a girl could want. But when she tried to end the relationship, he became someone else, possessive, threatening. He started following her, showing up at her apartment uninvited, calling her dozens of times a day. Felicia felt her throat tighten. She knew this story. She was living this story. We did not know how bad it was, Kang Min said. Jia Young was proud. She did not want to worry the family. She thought she could handle it herself. He paused. By the time I found out what was happening, it was too late. What happened to him? Felicia whispered. Kang Min was silent for a long moment. He is no longer a problem. That is all I will say. Felicia should have been horrified. She should have been terrified that she was standing next to a man who had likely done something terrible in the name of vengeance. But all she felt was a strange kinship. He understood. He understood in a way that no one else in her life ever had. I was building my father's empire when she died, Kang Min continued. I thought I was powerful. I thought I could protect everyone I cared about, but I could not protect my own sister. He turned to face her. When I saw you move in with that bruise on your wrist, when I saw the way you flinched at sounds, when I saw the fear in your eyes and realized that someone was hunting you, I could not ignore it. I could not stand by and watch it happen again. So you've been protecting me. I've been making sure what happened to Jae-young does not happen again, not when I can stop it. Felicia did not know what to say. This man, this alleged crime boss with blood on his hands, was haunted by the same kind of loss that had shaped her entire life. He was not helping her because he wanted something from her. He was helping her because he could not bear to watch another woman suffer at the hands of a man who should have loved her. Thank you, she finally whispered. The words felt inadequate, but they were all she had. Kang Min nodded, accepting her gratitude, but his expression hardened as he continued. Your ex is not going to stop. The man I dealt with was just the first step. Darnell will send someone else, or he will come himself. His dark eyes held hers with an intensity that made her shiver. And when he does, I will end this permanently, not with violence unless violence is required, but with the resources I have at my disposal. When I am finished, he will never threaten you again. Felicia believed him. And for the first time, since she had run from Darnell, she believed she might actually survive this. 1 month into her new life, Felicia received a delivery that made her blood run cold. It was waiting at her door when she came home from a client meeting. A bouquet of flowers in a black vase. Black roses, 12 of them. No card, but she did not need one to know who had sent them. Black roses were Darnell's signature. He had sent them after every argument, after every threat, after every time she had tried to pull away from him. They were his way of saying, I see you. I know what you did. I'm not happy about it. They were his version of an apology that was really a warning. I found you, these flowers said. I know where you live, and I'm coming. Felicia's hands were shaking so badly, she could barely get her phone out of her purse. She called the only number that felt safe. Kung Mun answered on the first ring. He knows where I am, she said, her voice cracking. He sent flowers, black roses. He's found my address. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Kung Mun spoke, his voice was calm and controlled, but there was steel beneath the surface. I know. My people intercepted his flight confirmation this morning. He lands in New York tomorrow at 8 a.m. Felicia felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. He's coming here. He's actually coming. Yes, but I need you to listen to me carefully. You are not going to run. You are not going to hide. You are going to stay in your apartment, lock the doors, and let me handle this. I'm not going to hide while you... Felicia, his voice was firm, cutting through her panic. I have resources you cannot imagine. I have people who specialize in making problems disappear without violence. I have contingency plans for situations exactly like this. Let me do what I do. Let me protect you. She wanted to argue. She wanted to handle this herself, the way she had handled everything else in her life. She was tired of being the victim. She was tired of letting men control her circumstances, even if this particular man was trying to help. But she was also exhausted. 3 years of surviving Darnell alone, 6 months of planning her escape, 1 month of thinking she was finally free. She did not have the strength to fight this battle by herself. Okay, she said quietly, I trust you. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Kung Mun spoke again, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. That is not something I take lightly. Over the next 24 hours, Kung Mun transformed the building into a fortress. He increased security at every entrance, positioning his own people alongside the building's regular guards. He installed additional cameras on their floor, hidden in places only he knew about. He had a team monitoring Darnell's movements from the moment he landed at JFK. And he invited Felicia to stay in his guest room, so she would not be alone. Felicia accepted. She packed a small bag and moved into the room next to his. It was beautifully decorated, with a view of the park and a bed more comfortable than anything she had ever slept in. But she could not relax. She paced. She checked her phone constantly. She jumped at every sound. That evening, Kung Mun found her standing at the window, watching the sun set over Manhattan. "Come with me," he said. He led her to his private balcony, a terrace that wrapped around the corner of the building and offered views of both the park and the city skyline. The air was cool and crisp. The city lights were just beginning to flicker on, turning Manhattan into a glittering carpet of diamonds. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping the whiskey Kung Mun had poured for them. Falasha felt herself relax for the first time in days. There was something about being near him that calmed the constant anxiety in her chest. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said finally. "You can ask. I may not answer. Have you ever been in love?" Kung Mun was quiet for a long moment. "Once, when I was younger, before I understood what this life would cost." He looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the city lights. "Love is a vulnerability in my world. People can use it against you. Your enemies can threaten the people you care about. Your allies can manipulate you through your attachments. It is safer to keep everyone at a distance." "That sounds lonely." "It is." He paused, taking a sip of his whiskey. "But loneliness is safer than loss. I learned that the hard way." Falasha understood that more than she wanted to admit. Dunal had made her afraid to trust anyone, afraid to let people close, afraid to be vulnerable ever again. She had built walls around her heart so high that she could not even see over them anymore. "I used to believe that," she said quietly. "But I think I'm tired of being safe and alone. I'm tired of letting fear make all my decisions. I want to actually live my life, not just survive it." Kung Mun looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, warmed, opened. Very slowly, he reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm against hers. His fingers were strong but gentle as they intertwined with hers. It was such a simple touch, but it felt like the most intimate thing that had happened to her in years. Neither of them said anything else. They just sat there, connected, watching the city hum beneath them as the stars came out one by one. The confrontation happened 3 days later. Kung Mun's team had been tracking Dunal's movements since he arrived in New York. He was staying at a cheap hotel in Midtown, meeting with shady contacts, trying to gather information about Falasha's exact location. He had hired another private investigator, but Kung Mun's people had intercepted him before he could do any damage. Dunal was getting desperate, and desperate men did stupid things. He must have realized that his usual tactics were not working. The men he hired kept disappearing or changing their minds. His contacts in the city were suddenly unwilling to help him. It was like an invisible wall had gone up around Falasha, and he could not figure out how to get through it. So he decided to try a different approach. Falasha received a text message from an unknown number claiming to be from the NYPD. "Your apartment was broken into last night. You need to come to the 19th precinct immediately to file a report and identify missing items." She showed the message to Kung Mun instead of responding. "He's trying to lure you out of the building," Kung Mun said, "which means he's getting desperate." "What do we do?" Kung Mun smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted his prey. "We give him what he wants, just not in the way he expects." The plan was simple. Falasha would appear to leave the building, drawing Dunal out of hiding. But she would be surrounded by Kung Mun's people, invisible in the crowd, but ready to act the moment Dunal made a move. The goal was to catch him in the act of threatening or approaching her, giving them legitimate grounds to involve the police and get a real restraining order with teeth. Everything went according to plan, until it did not. Dunal was smarter than they anticipated. He had not survived this long by being predictable. Instead of approaching Falasha himself, he had brought backup. 3 men from his Jersey City crew who owed him favors. Hard men with criminal records and nothing to lose. The moment Falasha stepped outside the building, they moved to intercept her. But Kung Mun had prepared for that too. His men materialized out of the crowd like ghosts, professional, efficient, trained in ways that suggested military or worse. Dunnell's backup did not stand a chance. Within seconds, all three men were on the ground, zip-tied and disoriented, as Kung Mun's team melted back into the shadows. Dunnell, seeing his plan crumble, tried to run. But Kung Mun was faster. He caught Dunnell 2 blocks away, in an alley between 2 buildings where the security cameras conveniently did not reach. Kung Mun slammed him against the brick wall and pinned him there with one arm, his face inches from Dunnell's. "You are going to listen very carefully," Kung Mun said. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, but there was something beneath it that made Dunnell's face go pale. "The woman you have been stalking is under my protection. She is not your property. She is not your girlfriend. She is not someone you can threaten and control. She is a human being who has done nothing wrong except try to escape from you." "You don't know who you're messing with," Dunnell snarled, trying to sound tough, but his voice cracked. "I know exactly who you are, Dunnell Pierce. I know about the women you've terrorized before Falasha. I know about the restraining orders you violated. I know about your little extortion ring in Jersey City and the money you've been skimming from your partners. I know everything." Darnell's face went from pale to white. "If you come near Felicia again," Kang Min continued, "if you send anyone near her, if you so much as think her name, I will dismantle your life piece by piece. Your money, your friends, your reputation, your freedom. I will take everything you have ever valued and burn it to ash. And then, when you have nothing left, I will make sure you spend the rest of your life in a cell for every crime you have committed, every woman you terrorized, every law you broke thinking you were untouchable. You can't. I already have evidence on my desk that ties you to extortion, stalking, wire fraud, and conspiracy. One phone call and it goes to the FBI. Another phone call and it goes to every news outlet in the country. Your choice." Darnell's bravado crumbled completely. He was shaking now, tears starting to form in his eyes. "Stay away from Felicia," Kang Min said, releasing him with a shove that sent him stumbling backward. "Stay away from New York, and if I ever hear your name again, there will be no second warning. Do you understand?" Darnell nodded frantically. "Say it." "I understand. I'll stay away. I won't bother her again." "Good," Kang Min stepped back. "Now run." Darnell ran. In the weeks that followed, Felicia's life transformed in ways she had never imagined possible. Darnell kept his word. He disappeared from New York within 24 hours, moving to Florida and selling his business. He was terrified to even mention Felicia's name, according to the people Kang Min had watching him. The evidence Kang Min had gathered was sent anonymously to the appropriate authorities, resulting in investigations into Darnell's past crimes. 2 of his previous victims came forward with their own stories when they heard he was under investigation. Felicia watched the news coverage with tears streaming down her face. For 3 years, she had lived in fear. For 6 months, she had planned her escape. For 1 month, she had been running. And now, finally, it was over. She was free, not just in body, but in spirit. The fear that had lived in her chest began to loosen. The constant vigilance relaxed. She started sleeping through the night without waking up in a panic. She started laughing at things that were funny instead of forcing smiles she did not feel. She reached out to old friends she had lost during her relationship with Darnell. Some of them had moved on, but others welcomed her back with open arms, relieved to finally understand what had happened to her. She rebuilt connections she thought were gone forever. She took on bigger freelance clients, confident enough now to pitch her services to major companies. Her business started growing. Her bank account started filling. She was building something real, something sustainable, something that belonged entirely to her. And she started writing, a blog about surviving coercive control. Anonymous at first, because old fears died hard, but her words resonated with people. Thousands of people who had experienced what she had experienced. Thousands of people who needed to know they were not alone. She was not just surviving anymore, she was thriving. Kang Min watched her transformation from a distance. He was proud of what she was building, proud of her courage, proud of the strength she had found within herself. But he also felt something else, something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. He found himself looking forward to their conversations, to the dinners they shared in his apartment, to the moments when her face lit up with laughter and he felt like the luckiest man in the world just to be near her. She made him want things he had given up on: a normal life, a real relationship, a future that was not defined by power and violence and the endless chess game of running an empire. She made him want to be better. One evening, Felicia knocked on his door with takeout containers. "You've done so much for me," she said, pushing past him into his apartment. "The least I can do is feed you. I promise there's no risk of a fire this time. I learned my lesson." They ate together in his living room, surrounded by the city lights. They talked about everything: his sister and how her death still haunted him, her childhood in foster care and how it had shaped her, his dreams of eventually stepping away from the criminal aspects of his business, her dreams of starting a nonprofit for abuse survivors. They talked until the food was gone, and the wine bottles were empty, and the city outside the windows had gone quiet. At the end of the night, Felicia looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "I'm not afraid of what you are," she said softly. "I've seen the worst of men. I know what cruelty looks like. And whatever you've done, whatever you are not cruel. You are not like him. You saved my life, Kang Min. Not just my body, but my spirit, my hope, my future. I don't know how to thank you for that." "You don't have to thank me." "I know I don't have to, but I want you to know." She paused, gathering her courage. "I'm more afraid of what my life would be if you hadn't been next door, if I had moved into any other apartment in any other building. I would still be running. I would still be terrified. I would still be alone." "Felicia, I know it's complicated. I know your life is dangerous. I know there are a million reasons why this is a bad idea. But I've spent years letting fear make my decisions. I don't want to do that anymore. I want to choose something, someone, and I choose you." Kang Min was silent for a long moment. His heart was pounding in a way it had not pounded in years. His carefully constructed walls were crumbling, and he could not find it in himself to rebuild them. He reached out and cupped her face with both hands. His touch was gentle, almost reverent, as if he was holding something infinitely precious. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure no one ever hurts you again," he said. "Not because I feel obligated, not because of my sister, but because somewhere along the way you became the most important person in my world, and I would burn down everything I've built to keep you safe." Felicia leaned forward and kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, two damaged people finding their way to each other through the darkness. But then it deepened, and for the first time in years, neither of them felt alone. 1 year later, Felicia stood on the rooftop terrace of their building in Manhattan, watching the sun set over the city that had become her home. So much had changed in 12 months that she sometimes had trouble believing her life was real. Her nonprofit, Rising Free, had launched 6 months ago with funding from an anonymous donor. Kang Min thought he was being subtle, but Felicia had figured it out immediately. She did not mind. The money was going to a good cause, and his generosity was one of the many things she had come to love about him. Rising Free had already helped over 200 women escape abusive relationships and find safe housing. Felicia had hired a small team of counselors and advocates who had experienced abuse themselves. She had partnered with legal aid organizations to help survivors navigate restraining orders and custody battles. She had built something that mattered, something that would outlast her. Her blog had grown into a full platform with thousands of followers. She was no longer anonymous. She had started giving interviews, sharing her story publicly, becoming a voice for survivors who did not have the resources to speak for themselves. She had been featured in magazines and podcasts, and even a documentary about coercive control. And Darnell? He was in prison now. The investigations had uncovered enough evidence to put him away for years. 2 of his previous victims had testified against him. The man who had terrorized her for 3 years was finally facing consequences for his actions. Felicia had watched the verdict on television, surrounded by the women she had helped through Rising Free. They had cheered together, cried together, celebrated a victory that belonged to all of them. She was not a victim anymore. She was a survivor, a thriver, a warrior. And she owed so much of that to the man who had saved her life by simply living next door. Kang Min had changed too. Over the past year, He had begun the slow, difficult process of transitioning his organization away from illegal operations. It would take years, maybe decades, to fully disentangle himself from the criminal world his father had built. There were obligations and debts and relationships that could not be severed overnight. But he had started. He had hired legitimate business consultants to help him restructure Horizon Pacific Imports. He had begun distancing himself from the more dangerous aspects of his network. He was building something different, something cleaner, something he could be proud of. For her. For the future they had started to imagine together. Felicia made him want to be the kind of man who deserved her. And for the first time in his life, he was willing to do the work to become that man. Kang-min joined her on the rooftop as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her close against his chest. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "The day I moved in," she said softly. "I was so scared. I thought I was just hiding. I had no idea I was about to find everything I never knew I was looking for." "If you had known your neighbor was a crime boss, would you have moved in anyway?" Felicia laughed, the sound bright and free. "Probably not, which is why I'm glad I didn't know. The universe put me exactly where I needed to be, right next door to you." Kang-min smiled against her hair, a real smile, the kind she had spent months learning to draw out of him. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city lights flicker on as darkness crept across the sky. Manhattan spread out before them like a glittering promise, full of possibilities they had never imagined. Then Kang-min turned her to face him. His expression was serious, but there was warmth in his dark eyes that made her heart flutter. "Marry me," he said. Felicia's breath caught in her throat. "What?" "I know it's complicated. I know my life is still messy. I know there are challenges ahead that we can't even imagine yet, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." He pulled out a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a ring that made her gasp, elegant and understated. A single diamond surrounded by smaller emeralds that sparkled like stars. "Marry me, Felicia. Let me spend the rest of my life loving you." Felicia looked at the ring. She looked at him. She thought about everything they had survived to get here. The fear, the danger, the darkness they had both carried for so long. And then she thought about the future, the life they could build together, the love that had grown between them against all odds. "Yes," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. 1,000 times yes. Kang-min's face split into the widest smile she had ever seen on him. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands steady even though she could see the emotion shimmering in his eyes. Then he pulled her close and kissed her with everything he had been holding back for years. Behind them, the Manhattan skyline glittered with promise. Ahead of them, a future neither of them had dared to dream stretched out like an open road. Felicia had moved into a new apartment to hide from her past. She had expected to find safety, maybe peace if she was lucky. She had found her forever instead. Thank you for watching to the end. Please remember to click the subscribe button and make sure you like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thank you.